Standing alone in the middle of the Bellagio casino floor at 2 in the morning, surrounded by the relentless electronic symphony of slot machines and the acrid smell of cigarette smoke, Maya Chen realized that her marriage had just become a crime scene. The text message on her phone glowed like evidence under harsh fluorescent lights. "Hope you enjoy your solo vacation. Don't call us. We'll call you when we feel like it. Maybe." The boys. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The accompanying photo showed her husband Derek and his two brothers, Jake and Connor, raising beer bottles in a mock toast from what appeared to be a private jet. They were already airborne, leaving her stranded in Las Vegas with nothing but her purse, her phone, and a revelation that would cost them everything they thought they knew about the woman they'd just abandoned. Maya stared at the message for 37 seconds, her analytical mind automatically cataloging every detail that would later become relevant. The timestamp, the metadata embedded in the image, the background details visible through the airplane window, and the reflection of the phone screen in Derek's aviator sunglasses. Her husband and his brothers had no idea they'd just provided her with a digital breadcrumb trail that would lead directly back to them. But first, she needed to process the emotional earthquake that had just shattered her world. 3 hours earlier, they'd all been laughing together at dinner, celebrating what Derek had called a spontaneous couples weekend in Vegas. His brothers had flown in from Denver, supposedly to surprise her for her birthday, and Derek had insisted they hit the casinos for some late-night fun. She'd been touched by the thoughtfulness, especially since her birthday wasn't until next month. Now she understood why Jake had kept checking his phone during dinner, why Connor had insisted on ordering another round when she'd suggested heading back to the hotel, why Derek had been unusually attentive all evening, taking selfies and encouraging her to drink more wine than usual. They'd been documenting her birthday surprise while planning her abandonment. The cruelest part wasn't the logistics of being stranded. Maya could afford a hotel room and a flight home. She had credit cards, she had savings, she had friends who would help without hesitation. The cruelest part was the casual dismissal, the assumption that she was so dependent and helpless that being abandoned would break her completely. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Maya pulled up her secure banking app and checked her balances while the casino chaos swirled around her. Personal savings, $47,000. Business account, $23,000. Emergency fund, $15,000. The financial security she'd built independently over 6 years of marriage suddenly felt like armor. Derek had always insisted they keep separate finances because he made more money, which had annoyed her at the time but now seemed like providence. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she needed. Sandra Kim, her former colleague from North Point Security, now worked as a senior investigator for the Nevada Gaming Commission. If anyone could help her understand the digital forensics of tracking 3 idiots who thought they were clever, it would be Sandra. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Maya? Girl, why are you calling me at 2 in the morning? Please tell me you're not in trouble." "I'm in Vegas, and I need advice about tracking someone who thinks they've covered their digital footprints," Maya said, keeping her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. Hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to disappear for a while, but they were stupid enough to post evidence of their location on social media, how would you find them? Sandra's laugh was sharp and knowing. Hypothetically, I'd say that person is an amateur, and you could track them with basic digital forensics tools that any competent cybersecurity professional would have access to. What kind of trouble are you in, and do I need to dispatch Nevada State Police to your location? Maya looked around the casino, noting the security cameras positioned strategically throughout the space, the facial recognition software that was undoubtedly cataloging her presence, the digital ecosystem that surrounded every moment of modern life. The kind of trouble that requires patience, planning, and a complete understanding of how stupid people create evidence of their own stupidity. "That's my specialty," Sandra said. "Where are you right now, and what do you need?" 20 minutes later, Maya was sitting in a booth at a 24-hour diner 6 blocks from the Strip, nursing coffee that tasted like revenge, and plotting the systematic destruction of 3 men who thought abandoning a woman in Vegas was hilarious. Sandra had driven over from her apartment in Henderson, arriving with a laptop bag and the kind of predatory smile that suggested she was looking forward to whatever Maya had in mind. "Tell me everything," Sandra said, sliding into the booth across from her and opening her laptop with the efficiency of someone who solved complex problems for a living. "Start from the beginning and don't leave out any details, no matter how small they seem." Maya began with the phone call 3 days ago when Derek had announced the surprise trip. She described the flight, the hotel check-in, the dinner conversation, and every interaction that seemed normal at the time but now felt like performance art. Sandra took notes in a way that reminded Maya why they'd worked so well together at North Point, before Maya had made the mistake of scaling back her career to support Derek's advancement in corporate sales. "They're not criminal masterminds. They're just garden-variety a-holes who think technology is magic they don't need to understand. Show me the photo they sent." Maya handed over her phone, watching Sandra's expression shift from professional interest to personal offense as she examined the image. "Oh, these idiots have no idea what they just did to themselves. This metadata is going to tell us everything we need to know about their location, their equipment, their flight plan, and probably their shoe sizes." Sandra's fingers moved across her laptop keyboard with surgical precision, extracting information from the image file that Maya's phone had received. "Private jet, tail number partially visible in the reflection on Derek's husband's sunglasses. Flight tracking data shows a Cessna Citation departing McCarran at 1:47 a.m., destination Denver. The phone used to take this photo is an iPhone 14 Pro registered to Derek Chen, and his location services were active when he sent it." "They're going to Denver?" "According to the flight plan, yes. But here's where it gets interesting." Sandra pulled up another screen showing real-time flight tracking. The plane landed at Denver International 43 minutes ago, but Derek's phone pinged a cell tower in Aspen 20 minutes after that. They're not staying in Denver.
They're going skiing. Maya felt something cold and calculating settle in her chest. Derek had been planning a ski weekend with his brothers while leaving her stranded in Vegas. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. "Can you track their exact location?" "I can track their phones, their credit card usage, their social media activity, and probably their grocery store loyalty card purchases if they're stupid enough to use them," Sandra said. "But before we go down that road, I need to ask you something important. What exactly are you planning to do with this information?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Maya hadn't fully considered until that moment. She could use Sandra's expertise to track Derek and his brothers, but then what? Confrontation? Revenge? Legal action? Or something more strategic that would teach them a lesson they'd never forget? "I want them to understand what it feels like to be underestimated," Maya said finally. "They think I'm helpless without them. They think I'm dependent on Derek for everything. They think abandoning me in Vegas will break me. And instead, I'm going to show them exactly who they married into this family." Sandra's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Maya, I've been waiting 6 years for you to remember who you used to be. The woman who could trace cryptocurrency transactions through 7 different blockchain networks and identify money laundering operations that the FBI missed. You've been playing suburban housewife for so long, I was starting to worry you'd forgotten you have a PhD in cybersecurity and more digital forensic certifications than most federal agents." The reminder hit Maya like electricity. She had been playing small for years, convincing herself that supporting Derek's career was more important than building her own. She'd turned down consulting opportunities, declined speaking engagements, and gradually withdrawn from the professional network that had once recognized her as one of the most skilled digital investigators on the West Coast. Derek had never explicitly asked her to scale back her career, but he'd made it clear through 1,000 small comments and dismissive gestures that her work was less important than his. When she'd landed a major consulting contract with the Treasury Department, he'd complained about her travel schedule. When she'd been quoted in a cybersecurity publication, he'd joked that his wife was becoming too famous for him. When she'd won an industry award, he skipped the ceremony because he had a client dinner. Gradually, she'd learned to minimize her accomplishments to avoid conflict. She'd stopped mentioning major cases, stopped talking about interesting technical challenges, stopped sharing the satisfaction she felt when her analysis helped law enforcement agencies solve complex crimes. She'd become Maya the supportive wife, instead of Maya the expert who could trace digital footprints through the darkest corners of the internet. They have no idea what they just unleashed, she said, feeling something awakening in her chest that had been dormant for too long. Derek thinks I'm tech support. His brothers think I fix computers for a living. They're about to learn the difference between basic IT troubleshooting and advanced digital forensics. Sandra opened a secure application on her laptop and began typing commands that would have impressed the cybersecurity team at Fort Meade. Let's start with comprehensive surveillance. I want to know everything they do, everywhere they go, everyone they talk to, and every transaction they make. If they buy a pack of gum, I want receipts. If they take a selfie, I want location data. If they breathe, I want atmospheric analysis. Is that legal? They're tracking their own activities through social media, location services, and electronic payments. I'm just aggregating publicly available information and data they're voluntarily sharing with corporate platforms. Everything I'm accessing, a competent private investigator could gather through completely legal means. Over the next hour, Sandra built a comprehensive surveillance profile that would have made the NSA proud. Derek, Jake, and Connor had checked into the St. Regis Aspen using Derek's credit card. They'd posted Instagram stories from the hotel bar, tagged their location on Snapchat, and uploaded photos to Facebook that included metadata showing their exact coordinates down to the meter. Amateur hour, Mundred screenshotting every social media post and saving them to an encrypted drive. They're documenting their entire trip like they're proud of what they did to you. The Instagram stories were particularly damaging. Jake had posted a video of the three of them toasting with expensive whiskey with text overlay reading, "Boys trip achieved. Sometimes you just have to ditch the dead weight and live your best life." Connor had shared a photo of their hotel suite with the caption, "When you finally escape the ball and chain, you upgrade to the presidential suite." Most damning of all, Derek had posted a photo of the three of them on the balcony with a view of Aspen Mountain with text that made Maya's blood pressure spike. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is independence. Maya's probably discovering her inner strength right about now. Character building. They'll thank you later. Character building? Maya repeated, her voice deadly quiet. He thinks abandoning me in Vegas is character building. Sandra looked up from her laptop with genuine concern. Maya, I need you to take a deep breath and think carefully about your next move.
These men just provided you with enough evidence to destroy their reputations, their careers, and possibly their freedom, depending on how creative you want to get. But once you start this process, there's no putting the toothpaste back in the tube. Maya stared at the photos of her husband celebrating her abandonment, feeling years of suppressed resentment crystallizing into something much more dangerous. What do you mean about their freedom? Derek works in financial services, right? Regional sales manager for Morrison Investment Group? Senior vice president of client relations, actually. He was promoted last year. Sandra's eyebrows rose. Even better. Morrison Investment Group manages pension funds and municipal investment portfolios. They're heavily regulated by both state and federal agencies. If Derek's judgment and character came into question, if there were reasons to believe he showed poor decision-making or ethical lapses in his personal life, that could trigger compliance reviews of his professional conduct. You're saying his job could be at risk? I'm saying that abandoning your wife in Vegas and bragging about it on social media might not align with Morrison's code of professional ethics, especially if that abandonment involved other questionable decisions that demonstrated a pattern of poor judgment. Maya's hands clenched into fists. Show me. The video was from Connor's phone, apparently recorded without Derek's knowledge during what appeared to be a private conversation between the brothers. Derek was clearly intoxicated, speaking with the kind of brutal honesty that alcohol sometimes provides. The key is making them think you need you more than you need them. Derek's voice came through Sandra's laptop speakers. Maya's smart, but she's been out of the game so long she doesn't realize how much her skills have degraded. She thinks she's still some kind of cybersecurity expert, but she hasn't done real technical work in years. She's basically an expensive secretary at this point. Jake's voice joined the conversation. What if she tries to get back into consulting or something?
With what network? With what recent experience? She burned all her professional bridges when she decided to play housewife. No one's going to hire a middle-aged woman who's been out of the industry for 6 years, no matter how good she used to be. Connor's laughter was audible in the background. So this Vegas thing is like a wake-up call? It's reality therapy. She needs to understand her actual position in the relationship. She's not my partner, she's my dependent. And dependents don't get to make demands or expect equal treatment. They get what they're given and they're grateful for it. The video ended with the sound of beer bottles clinking together and another toast. Maya stared at Sandra's laptop screen, feeling something fundamental shift inside her chest. The marriage she thought she was fighting to save had been dead for years. She'd just been too naive to recognize the corpse. "How long have you had access to this video?" Maya asked. Connor posted it to a private Instagram story 2 hours ago. He probably thinks it's hilarious. Men like this always document their own stupidity because they can't resist bragging about their cleverness. Maya pulled out her phone and began scrolling through her own social media accounts, looking at photos of herself and Derek from the past year with new eyes.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Every smile looked forced now. Every couple's photo felt like evidence of her own self-deception. She'd been performing happiness while her husband was systematically undermining her self-worth and planning her public humiliation. Sandra, I need to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer. Shoot! If someone wanted to conduct a comprehensive investigation into Derek's business practices, looking for evidence of ethical violations or potential fraud, how would they go about it? Sandra closed her laptop and leaned back in the booth, studying Maya's face with the intensity of someone who'd spent years reading people for a living. That's a very specific question that suggests you're thinking beyond marriage counseling. Derek's been dismissing my professional capabilities for years. He's convinced that I'm intellectually dependent on him, that my skills have degraded, that I couldn't survive without his guidance and support. I want to test that theory. By investigating his business practices? By applying the same analytical skills to his professional life that I used to apply to complex cybersecurity cases. If Derek's judgment is as superior as he believes, his business practices should be flawless. If his ethical standards are as high as he claims, there should be no questionable decisions in his professional history. Sandra was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications of what Maya was suggesting. Maya, investigating someone's business practices is serious business. If you find evidence of wrongdoing, you'd be ethically obligated to report it to the appropriate authorities. Are you prepared for those consequences? Derek just told his brothers that I'm basically an expensive secretary whose skills have degraded to uselessness. He's planned and executed my public humiliation as what he calls reality therapy. He thinks I'm too dependent and powerless to respond effectively. Maya met Sandra's eyes directly. I think it's time to test his assumptions about my capabilities. This could end his career. His career will end or continue based on his own actions and decisions. I'm just planning to examine those actions and decisions with the same attention to detail that I used to apply to Treasury Department investigations. Sandra reopened her laptop and pulled up a new application, this one designed for comprehensive background investigations. Derek Chen, Senior Vice President of Client Relations at Morrison Investment Group. Let's see what kind of digital footprint he's created in his professional life. The search results began populating immediately. Derek's LinkedIn profile, his company bio, SEC filings that mentioned his name, industry publications where he'd been quoted, conference speaking engagements, professional certifications, and educational background. On the surface, everything looked impressive and legitimate. Clean professional image, Sandra said, scrolling through the results. But that's just the surface layer. Real investigation requires looking at patterns of behavior, financial transactions, client relationships, and decision-making processes. If Derek's been cutting corners or bending rules, the evidence will be in the details. What kind of details? Client entertainment expenses that exceed industry norms, gifts or payments to potential clients that might constitute bribes, relationships with vendors or service providers that create conflicts of interest,
investment recommendations that benefit Derek more than his clients. There are dozens of ways that financial services professionals can cross ethical lines, and most of them leave paper trails. Sandra pulled up Morrison Investment Group's public filings and began cross-referencing Derek's name with various transactions and client relationships. This is going to take hours of detailed analysis. Are you sure you want to go down this road? Maya thought about Derek's voice on that video, dismissing her capabilities and mocking her intelligence. She thought about the careful planning that had gone into her abandonment, the casual cruelty of leaving her stranded while they celebrated their freedom from her presence. She thought about 6 years of gradually diminishing herself to avoid conflict, of accepting dismissal and disrespect in the name of marital harmony. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she said. "Derek thinks my skills have degraded to uselessness. He's about to discover that analytical capabilities don't deteriorate, they compound with experience." Sandra smiled and cracked her knuckles like a pianist preparing for a concert. "Then let's show these idiots what happens when they underestimate a woman who used to trace money laundering operations for the federal government." The investigation began with Derek's expense reports from the past 2 years. As a senior vice president, he had significant discretionary spending authority for client entertainment and business development. Sandra accessed Morrison's publicly available financial disclosures and began comparing Derek's reported expenses with industry standards and internal company benchmarks. "Interesting," Sandra murmured after an hour of analysis. "Derek's client entertainment expenses are 43% higher than other vice presidents at similar firms. That could be legitimate if he's generating proportionally higher revenue, but it could also indicate padded expense reports or inappropriate use of company funds." Maya leaned over to look at the spreadsheet Sandra had created. What constitutes inappropriate use? Personal expenses disguised as business expenses, entertainment that benefits Derek more than the client, gifts or payments that cross the line from relationship building to bribery. The key is establishing patterns that suggest systematic abuse rather than isolated incidents.
They found the first pattern in Derek's golf expenses. Over the past 18 months, he'd charged the company for golf outings at exclusive courses across the country, claiming they were client entertainment events. But cross-referencing the dates with Morrison's client database showed that several of these alleged client meetings involved people who weren't actually clients. "He's been charging personal golf trips to the company as business expenses," Sandra said, highlighting the discrepancies in red. "This golf outing in Scottsdale last March was allegedly a client meeting with Robert Harrison from Denver Municipal Pension Fund. But Robert Harrison retired 6 months before this trip, and Denver Municipal isn't even a Morrison client." Maya felt a familiar thrill of discovery, the satisfaction of finding patterns hidden in complex data. How much money are we talking about? For the fraudulent golf expenses alone, approximately $38,000 over 18 months. But that's just one category of potential misconduct. They moved on to Derek's travel expenses, finding similar patterns of personal trips disguised as business travel. A week in Miami that was allegedly a conference, but involved no registered conference attendance. A ski trip to Vail that was reported as a client retreat, but included no actual clients. Weekend trips to wine country that were categorized as team-building exercises, but involved only Derek and his brothers. "He's been systematically defrauding his employer," Maya said, feeling pieces of Derek's character clicking into place with devastating clarity. "The man who lectures me about fiscal responsibility has been stealing from his company for years." "It gets worse," Sandra said, pulling up another screen. "Derek's been recommending investment products to clients that generate higher commissions for him personally, even when those products aren't in the client's best interests. The SEC has specific guidelines about fiduciary responsibility, and Derek's been violating them consistently." The pattern was clear and damning. Derek had been prioritizing his own financial gain over his clients' investment outcomes, recommending high-fee products that enriched him while providing inferior returns for the pension funds and municipal accounts that trusted his expertise. "This is securities fraud," Maya said, her analytical mind automatically calculating the scope of Derek's misconduct. How much money have his clients lost because of his self-serving recommendations?
Sandra ran calculations based on the investment products Derek had recommended versus industry-standard alternatives with lower fees and better performance. Conservative estimate, his clients have lost approximately $2.7 million in potential returns over the past 3 years due to Derek's biased recommendations. Maya stared at the numbers on Sandra's screen, feeling the full weight of Derek's hypocrisy settle on her shoulders. The man who dismissed her as financially dependent had been systematically stealing from his employer and defrauding his clients. The husband who'd mocked her professional capabilities had been violating basic ethical standards in his own career. Sandra, what's the typical penalty for this level of securities fraud? Criminal charges, civil penalties, permanent ban from the financial services industry, and personal liability for client losses. Derek could be looking at federal prison time and financial ruin. The irony was perfect. Derek had abandoned her in Vegas because he believed she was helpless and dependent, incapable of surviving without his financial support. In reality, his own career was built on illegal activities that could collapse at any moment, while her skills remained as sharp and valuable as ever. "I need to make some decisions about how to proceed," Maya said, closing Sandra's laptop and leaning back in the booth. "This information could destroy Derek's life completely." "That's exactly what he was trying to do to you. He's been systematically undermining your confidence and independence while building his own success through fraud and theft. Some people might call that poetic justice." Maya considered her options while the diner's fluorescent lights hummed overhead and the slot machines continued their electronic symphony in the distance. She could report Derek's misconduct to the SEC and his employer, triggering investigations that would likely end his career and result in criminal charges. She could confront him directly with the evidence, using it as leverage in divorce proceedings. Or she could wait and gather additional evidence, building an even stronger case for whatever consequences she ultimately decided to pursue. "I want to do this right. If Derek's going to face consequences for his actions, those consequences should be based on comprehensive evidence and proper procedures. I want him to understand that his downfall wasn't revenge, it was justice." Sandra nodded approvingly. "That's the difference between you and him. Derek operates from impulse and emotion, making decisions based on what he wants in the moment. You operate from logic and analysis, building systematic solutions to complex problems. How long would it take to build a bulletproof case against him? With the evidence we've already gathered, we could have a comprehensive report ready for federal investigators within a week. But if you want to be absolutely certain that every possible violation is documented, I'd recommend 2 weeks of intensive investigation." Maya made her decision with the same analytical precision she had once applied to national security cases. 2 weeks. I want everything documented with irrefutable evidence. When Derek faces the consequences of his actions, I want those consequences to be comprehensive and permanent. What about Jake and Connor? What about them? They participated in your abandonment. They knew it was planned in advance, they celebrated your humiliation, and they documented their involvement on social media. Depending on their own professional situations, this could have serious consequences for them as well. Maya pulled out her phone and looked at the photos Derek's brothers had posted from Aspen, showing them celebrating her abandonment without a trace of guilt or remorse. Jake worked as a commercial loan officer at a major bank. Connor was a real estate attorney specializing in commercial transactions.
Both careers required professional licenses that could be revoked for ethical violations or character issues. "Include them in the investigation," she said. "If they're going to participate in cruelty, they can participate in the consequences." Sandra's smile was predatory. "Maya, it's like watching you wake up from a 6-year coma. The woman I used to work with is definitely still in there." As the sun began to rise over Las Vegas, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in years: complete clarity about her own capabilities and worth. Derek and his brothers had intended to break her spirit by abandoning her in Vegas, forcing her to confront her supposed helplessness and dependence. Instead, they'd awakened analytical skills that had been dormant but never lost, and provided her with the motivation to use those skills against them. They'd underestimated her so completely that they'd documented their own cruelty while simultaneously providing her with access to evidence of Derek's professional misconduct. Their arrogance had made them careless, and their carelessness was about to cost them everything they thought was secure. "Sandra, I need a favor," Name it. I want to disappear for the next 2 weeks while we build this case. Derek thinks I'm stranded and helpless, and I want him to continue thinking that while we gather evidence. Can you help me stay completely off the grid while still maintaining access to the investigative resources we need? I can set you up with a secure location, encrypted communications, and access to databases that Derek's never heard of. But are you sure you want to let him think you're struggling? He might actually enjoy the idea that you're suffering. Maya thought about Derek's voice on that video, dismissing her capabilities and mocking her dependence. She thought about the careful planning that had gone into her abandonment, the weeks of preparation for her humiliation. She thought about 6 years of gradually accepting less respect, less consideration, less recognition of her own worth. Let him enjoy it, she said. When this is over, when he's facing federal investigators and criminal charges, when his career is destroyed and his reputation is ruined, I want him to remember these 2 weeks when he thought he'd broken me. I want him to understand exactly how wrong he was about my capabilities. Sandra packed up her laptop with the efficiency of someone who'd executed complex operations in hostile environments. Maya, I have one last question before we start this process. Go ahead. When Derek and his brothers are facing the consequences of their actions, when their careers are over and their reputations are destroyed, when they finally understand who they were really dealing with, what do you want them to know about why this happened to them? Maya considered the question while the Las Vegas morning sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and orange. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 years ago, confident and capable and respected for her expertise. She thought about the woman she'd become, diminished and dismissed and systematically undermined. And she thought about the woman she was about to become again, armed with skills they'd never understood and motivated by justice they'd never expected. I want them to know that underestimating people has consequences, she said. I want them to understand that dismissing someone's capabilities doesn't make those capabilities disappear. And I want them to remember that the woman they abandoned in Vegas was never the helpless dependent they believed her to be. She was a weapon they didn't know how to recognize. Exactly. And now they're going to learn what happens when you hand a weapon the motivation to use itself. The safe house Sandra had arranged was a modest apartment in Henderson, Nevada, 20 minutes from the Strip and completely invisible to anyone looking for Maya Chen. The unit belonged to a retired federal agent who specialized in providing secure accommodations for people who needed to disappear temporarily while sensitive investigations unfolded. No lease agreements, no utility bills, no paper trail that could be traced back to Maya's real identity. Sandra had equipped the apartment with everything Maya needed for comprehensive digital forensics work. 3 high-end laptops with encrypted hard drives, satellite internet connections that couldn't be monitored by conventional means, access to databases that required federal security clearances, and communication systems that would make the NSA proud. The dining room table had been converted into a command center that looked like something from a spy thriller. Maya spent her first morning in the safe house establishing secure communication protocols with Sandra and reviewing the evidence they'd already gathered. Derek's phone continued to ping cell towers in Aspen, providing real-time location data that confirmed he was still celebrating his brilliant prank while remaining completely unaware that his digital footprints were being monitored and analyzed. The brothers had maintained their social media documentation of the trip, apparently convinced that their abandonment strategy was so clever it deserved comprehensive recording. Jake had posted Instagram stories showing their ski lessons, their expensive dinners, and their late-night celebrations in hotel bars. Connor had shared Facebook photos of their hotel suite, their rental equipment, and candid shots of Derek looking relaxed and happy in ways Maya hadn't seen in years. Most revealing of all, Derek had begun posting philosophical observations about freedom and independence. A photo of the Aspen sunrise, accompanied by text reading, "Sometimes you have to cut dead weight to soar higher." A selfie from the ski slopes with the caption, "Amazing how much lighter you feel when you stop carrying other people's baggage." A group shot of the 3 brothers raising glasses with the overlay, "Here's to men who know their worth and aren't afraid to demand respect." Maya screenshotted every post, every story, every comment, building a comprehensive record of their mindset and their complete lack of remorse. The digital evidence would be crucial when Derek eventually tried to claim that the abandonment had been a misunderstanding or a joke that went too far. His own words documented his deliberate cruelty and his belief that treating his wife with contempt was not only acceptable, but admirable.
While Derek celebrated his freedom, Maya began the systematic destruction of his professional life. She started with Morrison Investment Group's client database, cross-referencing Derek's reported activities with actual client interactions and financial outcomes. The pattern of self-serving recommendations became even clearer when examined over a longer time frame. Derek had been steering clients toward investment products that generated maximum commissions for him personally, regardless of whether those products served the client's best interests. Municipal pension funds that needed stable, low-fee investments were being directed toward complex financial instruments with high management fees and unpredictable returns. Conservative investors seeking retirement security were being pushed toward aggressive growth funds that enriched Derek while exposing retirees to unnecessary risk. The scope of Derek's misconduct was breathtaking. Over 5 years, he had systematically prioritized his own financial gain over his clients' investment outcomes, violating fundamental principles of fiduciary responsibility while building a reputation as a successful rainmaker for Morrison Investment Group. His superiors had rewarded his apparent success with promotions and increased responsibilities, never realizing that his revenue generation came at the expense of client welfare.
Maya documented each instance of misconduct with the meticulous attention to detail that had once made her invaluable to Treasury Department investigations. She created spreadsheets comparing Derek's recommendations to industry benchmarks, charts showing the correlation between his commission rates and his investment advice, and timelines that demonstrated the systematic nature of his ethical violations. The evidence was overwhelming, but Maya wanted more than just professional misconduct. She wanted to understand the complete scope of Derek's deception, both in his career and in their marriage. If he'd been lying about his business practices, what else had he been lying about? She began investigating Derek's personal finances, using techniques that were completely legal but required expertise that most people didn't possess. Bank records, credit card statements, investment account activity, and real estate transactions all painted a picture of a man whose lifestyle far exceeded his reported income. Derek had been living beyond his means for years, funding his expensive tastes through the fraudulent expense reports Maya had already discovered and through investment activities that bordered on insider trading. He'd been using client information to make personal investment decisions, essentially front-running his own recommendations to maximize his personal profits. The apartment Derek shared with Maya was mortgaged to the maximum allowable limit, with multiple home equity loans that he'd obtained by inflating their household income on loan applications. His luxury car was financed through a scheme that involved listing it as a business vehicle to obtain preferential rates, despite using it exclusively for personal transportation. Even his golf club membership had been obtained through false representations about his professional status and financial stability. Maya realized with growing amazement that Derek's entire lifestyle was a carefully constructed illusion funded by systematic fraud. The successful financial advisor who dismissed her capabilities as degraded was actually a house of cards held together by lies, theft, and illegal market manipulation. While Maya worked in Nevada, Derek continued his performance of liberation in Colorado. His social media posts grew increasingly philosophical, as if abandoning his wife had provided him with profound insights into masculine independence and personal growth. He shared quotes about courage, posted articles about men reclaiming their power, and engaged with online communities that celebrated freedom from feminine manipulation. Sandra monitored these activities from her own location, providing Maya with real-time updates on Derek's digital behavior while maintaining their investigation's security protocols. The brothers seemed completely convinced that Maya was struggling helplessly in Las Vegas, probably calling friends for rescue and learning harsh lessons about her actual position in the relationship. They had no idea that Maya was systematically documenting evidence that would destroy not only Derek's career, but also the professional lives of his accomplices. Jake's position as a commercial loan officer required him to maintain high ethical standards and demonstrate sound judgment in his personal life. Connor's law license depended on his ability to represent clients without conflicts of interest or character issues that might compromise his professional integrity.
Both brothers had participated enthusiastically in Maya's abandonment, providing evidence of poor judgment and cruel behavior that could trigger professional reviews by their respective licensing boards. Jake's bank had strict policies about employees whose personal conduct might reflect poorly on the institution's reputation. Connor's State Bar Association took a dim view of attorneys whose character was called into question by unethical behavior in their private lives. Maya expanded her investigation to include Derek's brothers, using her digital forensic skills to examine their own professional activities for evidence of misconduct or poor judgment. What she found exceeded her expectations for both scope and stupidity. Jake had been approving commercial loans based on inflated property valuations and false financial statements, apparently believing that his personal relationships with borrowers justified relaxed underwriting standards. Several of these loans had already defaulted, costing his bank substantial amounts of money, while enriching Jake through kickbacks and personal favors from grateful borrowers. Connor had been using his law practice to facilitate real estate transactions that benefited his personal investment portfolio, creating conflicts of interest that violated state bar regulations. He'd been steering clients toward properties he owned or had financial interests in, then charging legal fees for transactions that primarily served his own financial gain. The three brothers weren't just cruel and arrogant, they were systematically corrupt in their professional lives while maintaining public facades of success and integrity. Their treatment of Maya reflected the same contempt for ethical standards that characterized their business practices. Maya created comprehensive files documenting each brother's misconduct, cross-referencing their illegal activities with their social media celebrations of abandoning her in Vegas. The evidence painted a picture of three men whose professional success was built on fraud, whose personal relationships were characterized by manipulation, and whose treatment of Maya reflected a broader pattern of exploiting people they considered inferior or powerless. As Derek's Aspen vacation entered its second week, Maya prepared to expand her investigation beyond financial misconduct. She wanted to understand the complete scope of Derek's deception, including any personal relationships that might have motivated his increasingly dismissive treatment of their marriage. Social media activity often revealed information that people thought they were keeping private, especially when alcohol was involved and inhibitions were lowered. Maya used advanced analytics tools to examine Derek's digital interactions over the past 2 years, looking for patterns that might indicate extramarital relationships or other personal secrets. What she found was both predictable and infuriating. Derek had been maintaining an active presence on dating applications despite being married, using photos that conveniently excluded his wedding ring and biographical information that described him as recently single and exploring new possibilities. His messaging history revealed ongoing relationships with multiple women, including several who worked in the financial services industry. Most damaging of all, Derek had been discussing his marriage with these potential romantic partners, describing Maya as a burden he was planning to deal with in the near future. The conversations revealed that Derek had been planning to end their marriage for months, building financial and emotional independence while systematically undermining Maya's confidence and professional network. The abandonment in Vegas wasn't an impulsive prank. It was part of a calculated strategy to isolate Maya emotionally and financially, making her more likely to accept whatever terms Derek eventually offered in divorce proceedings. He'd been planning to abandon her permanently while ensuring that she felt too powerless and dependent to negotiate effectively for her share of marital assets. Derek's dismissal of her professional capabilities hadn't been casual condescension, it had been psychological warfare designed to weaken her confidence and independence, preparing her for her abandonment on terms that would maximize Derek's advantage. The man she trusted with her heart and her future had been systematically destroying her self-worth while planning her ultimate discarding. The cruelty was breathtaking, but it was also legally actionable. Derek's deliberate emotional abuse, combined with his financial deception and his systematic preparation for divorce, constituted fraud that could void any prenuptial agreements and expose him to significant financial penalties in divorce proceedings. Maya married Derek without a prenuptial agreement, believing their partnership was based on mutual respect and shared goals. Derek had subsequently convinced her to sign financial documents that limited her access to certain marital assets, claiming these agreements were necessary for tax optimization and business liability protection. Maya now realized these documents had been designed to protect Derek's fraudulent income from discovery while limiting Maya's ability to claim her fair share of marital property. The financial documents Derek had convinced her to sign were potentially void if they'd been obtained through misrepresentation or fraud. Maya's analysis of Derek's true financial situation revealed that he'd been lying about their household income, their debt obligations, and their investment portfolio when he'd presented those agreements for her signature. More importantly, Derek's systematic emotional abuse and his planned abandonment constituted the kind of marital misconduct that could affect property division in divorce proceedings. States like Nevada, where they'd been married, took a dim view of spouses who engaged in deliberate emotional cruelty or financial deception designed to disadvantage their partners. Maya began preparing comprehensive documentation that would support not only criminal charges against Derek for his professional misconduct, but also civil litigation that would ensure she received appropriate compensation for years of emotional abuse and financial manipulation. Derek thought he was planning her abandonment on terms favorable to him. In reality, he was creating evidence that would maximize her leverage in divorce proceedings. While Maya built her legal case in Nevada, Derek's social media presence in Colorado grew increasingly elaborate. He'd begun posting motivational content about masculine independence, sharing articles about men who overcame manipulative relationships, and engaging with online communities that celebrated freedom from feminine manipulation. Sandra monitored these activities from her own location, providing Maya with real-time updates on Derek's digital behavior while maintaining their investigation's security protocols. The brothers seemed completely convinced that Maya was struggling helplessly in Las Vegas, probably calling friends for rescue and learning harsh lessons about her actual position in the relationship. They had no idea that Maya was
Every post that celebrated his cruelty provided additional proof of his calculated misconduct. Sandra monitored Derek's activities with growing amazement at his complete lack of awareness. Maya, this man is literally providing evidence for every legal proceeding you might want to initiate, she reported during one of their secure communications. He's documenting premeditation, celebrating cruelty, and bragging about emotional abuse. Defense attorneys are going to have nightmares about representing him. What about his brothers? They're just as oblivious. Jake posted a video yesterday where he's laughing about how you're probably crying in some Vegas hotel room, begging for rescue. Connor shared an article about gold-digging wives who get their comeuppance. They think they're winning some kind of masculine superiority contest. Maya felt cold satisfaction at their complete miscalculation. Derek and his brothers believed they were demonstrating alpha male dominance by abandoning a helpless woman. They had no idea they were providing evidence for criminal investigators, professional licensing boards, and divorce attorneys who would use their own words to destroy them systematically. The investigation reached a turning point when Maya discovered Derek's most damaging secret. Hidden in encrypted files on his personal computer were records of systematic client account manipulation that went far beyond the investment misconduct she'd already documented. Derek had been using his access to client accounts to execute unauthorized trades that generated commissions for him while exposing clients to losses they'd never authorized. He'd been moving money between accounts to hide his activities, creating false documentation to cover his tracks, and lying to clients about investment performance to prevent them from discovering his theft. The unauthorized trading constituted multiple federal felonies that could result in decades of federal prison time. Derek hadn't just been giving bad investment advice, he'd been stealing directly from client accounts while falsifying records to conceal his theft. The scope of his criminal activity was staggering. Maya spent 3 days analyzing Derek's unauthorized trading records, building spreadsheets that tracked every illegal transaction and calculated the total amount he'd stolen from client accounts. The final number was devastating. Derek had illegally obtained over $1.2 million through unauthorized trades and systematic client account manipulation. The money had been used to fund Derek's expensive lifestyle, including the luxury car, the exclusive golf club membership, the high-end clothing and accessories, and the Aspen vacation where he was currently celebrating his brilliant abandonment strategy. Derek's entire facade of success had been purchased with money stolen from pension funds and retirement accounts, belonging to teachers, firefighters, and municipal employees who trusted him with their financial futures. Maya realized that Derek's victims weren't abstract corporate entities. They were working people whose retirement security had been compromised by his greed and criminal behavior. Teachers who would have had to work additional years because Derek had stolen from their pension funds. Firefighters whose retirement accounts had been depleted to pay for Derek's golf membership. Municipal employees whose financial futures had been sacrificed to fund Derek's performance of masculine success. The human cost of Derek's criminal behavior made Maya's investigation feel like a moral imperative rather than personal revenge. Derek wasn't just a cruel husband who'd abandoned his wife. He was a criminal who'd systematically stolen from working people while building a false reputation for professional excellence. Maya contacted Sandra through secure channels and requested an encrypted meeting to discuss the expanded scope of their investigation. They met at a coffee shop in Henderson, where Sandra arrived with additional equipment and a federal contact who specialized in complex financial crimes. Agent Maria Rodriguez from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit listened to Maya's presentation with growing amazement. The evidence Maya had gathered was more comprehensive than most federal investigations managed to compile after months of work by entire teams of agents and analysts. "Miss Chen, this is extraordinary work," Agent Rodriguez said after reviewing Maya's documentation. "You've essentially conducted a complete forensic accounting investigation while maintaining operational security that would impress our cybercrime units. How long did this take you?" 10 days of concentrated analysis. Derek and his brothers provided most of the evidence themselves through their social media documentation and their complete lack of digital security awareness. The unauthorized trading alone constitutes multiple federal felonies. The client account manipulation could result in 20 years sentences for each count, and the systematic nature of his misconduct suggests this was organized criminal activity rather than isolated incidents of poor judgment. Agent Rodriguez reviewed Maya's timeline of Derek's criminal activities, comparing it to the social media posts where he'd celebrated abandoning his wife and proclaimed his newfound freedom from feminine manipulation. "The timing is particularly damaging," she noted. "Derek was committing serious financial crimes while simultaneously planning your abandonment and bragging about his superior judgment and masculine independence. Federal prosecutors love this kind of irony." "What happens next?" "We need to verify your findings through official investigative channels, but your documentation provides an excellent roadmap for our investigation. Assuming we can confirm your analysis, Derek and potentially his brothers are looking at federal indictments for financial crimes, professional licensing revocations, and civil liability that could exceed their ability to pay." Maya felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't experienced since the night of her abandonment: complete certainty that justice would be served. Derek had planned her humiliation, believing that she was powerless and dependent, incapable of effective response to his cruelty. Instead, he'd awakened analytical capabilities that would systematically destroy everything he'd built through illegal means. "Agent Rodriguez, I have one additional request." "Go ahead." "When you arrest Derek and his brothers, I want them to understand exactly how this investigation began. I want them to know that the woman they abandoned in Vegas was the same woman who uncovered their criminal activities and provided the evidence that ended their careers." Agent Rodriguez smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd spent years pursuing financial criminals who believed they were too clever to be caught. "Ms. Chen, I think we can arrange for Derek to receive that information in a particularly memorable way." Maya returned to her safe house with a sense of completion that felt almost anticlimactic. Derek's fate was now in the hands of federal investigators who would pursue criminal charges with the full weight of the Justice Department.
his brothers would face their own consequences through professional licensing boards and criminal prosecutors who specialized in financial crimes. The investigation had revealed that Derek's abandonment of Maya was the least of his criminal activities, just the final act of arrogance from a man who'd been stealing from working people while building a false reputation for success and integrity. His cruel treatment of his wife reflected the same contempt for ethical standards that had characterized his professional misconduct for years.
Maya spent her final evening in Nevada reviewing the comprehensive case files she'd built over 2 weeks of intensive investigation. Derek had provided her with everything she'd needed to destroy him: access to his digital devices, knowledge of his business practices, insight into his character flaws, and motivation to apply her analytical skills without the restraint that had characterized their marriage. The woman Derek had dismissed as a dependent burden was actually a highly skilled digital forensics expert whose capabilities had been dormant, not degraded. His abandonment had simply provided her with the freedom and motivation to remember who she'd been before she'd subordinated her career to support his advancement. Derek's phone continued to ping cell towers in Aspen, where he was apparently enjoying his final days of freedom before federal agents arrived to inform him that his criminal activities had been discovered and documented by the wife he'd abandoned in Las Vegas. Maya packed her equipment with the satisfaction of someone who'd completed complex work with professional excellence. She'd applied the same analytical rigor to Derek's destruction that she'd once applied to national security investigations, building a case that would withstand scrutiny from defense attorneys, federal prosecutors, and professional licensing boards. The safe house had served its purpose, providing Maya with the security and resources she'd needed to conduct a comprehensive investigation while remaining completely invisible to Derek and his brothers. They'd spent 2 weeks celebrating their clever abandonment strategy while Maya systematically gathered evidence that would send them to federal prison. Sandra arrived to help Maya pack and to provide a final update on Derek's activities. "He posted another philosophical observation this morning," she reported with obvious amusement. "Something about how abandoning dead weight allows men to achieve their true potential. The timing is going to be particularly embarrassing when federal agents show him that post during his arrest. When will that happen?" Agent Rodriguez expects to have arrest warrants within 48 hours. Derek and his brothers are going to be taken into custody simultaneously to prevent them from coordinating their stories or destroying additional evidence. Maya felt a mixture of anticipation and sadness as she prepared to leave Nevada. The investigation had been professionally satisfying in ways she'd forgotten she could experience, reminding her why she'd loved complex analytical work before she'd set it aside to support Derek's career. But it had also been the final confirmation that her marriage was irretrievably broken, built on lies and contempt rather than partnership and respect. "Sandra, I need to ask you something." "Shoot." "When this is over, when Derek and his brothers are facing the consequences of their actions, do you think they'll understand what actually happened to them?" Sandra considered the question while helping Maya pack encrypted hard drives and secure communication equipment. "Maya, men like Derek never really understand consequences because they never really understand other people. They see the world in terms of what serves their immediate interests, and they assume everyone else operates the same way. So they'll blame me for their downfall rather than accepting responsibility for their crimes? They'll probably blame you, blame the system, blame their attorneys, and blame everyone except the person actually responsible for their criminal behavior. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that their victims will get justice and their criminal activities will be stopped permanently." Maya realized that Sandra was right. Derek's understanding of his situation was less important than the protection of his future victims and the compensation of the people he'd already harmed. The investigation had never been about teaching Derek a lesson. It had been about stopping a criminal and seeking justice for his victims. As Maya prepared to leave the safe house and return to her real life, she reflected on the transformation she'd experienced over 2 weeks of intensive investigation. The woman who'd been abandoned in Las Vegas had been diminished by years of accepting dismissal and disrespect. The woman who was leaving Nevada had reclaimed analytical capabilities and professional confidence that felt more authentic than anything she'd experienced during her marriage.
Derek's abandonment had been intended to break her spirit and force her to accept her dependence on his support and guidance. Instead, it had awakened skills and motivations that would destroy his criminal enterprise while rebuilding her professional reputation as one of the most effective digital forensic investigators on the West Coast. The irony was perfect. Derek had tried to abandon deadweight and ended up discarding the one person who could have protected him from the consequences of his own criminal stupidity. If he'd valued Maya's expertise instead of dismissing it, if he'd treated her as a partner instead of a dependent, she might have helped him recognize the legal dangers of his business practices before they became criminal liabilities. Instead, Derek chose cruelty over partnership, creating an enemy with the skills and motivation to destroy everything he'd built through illegal means. His abandonment strategy had been perfectly designed to eliminate the one person who understood him well enough to document his criminal behavior comprehensively. Maya drove away from the safe house knowing that Derek's arrest was imminent and that his criminal career was ending exactly as it deserved, with federal charges, professional disgrace, and financial ruin that would serve as a warning to other financial professionals who might consider stealing from working families to fund their own greed and arrogance. The woman Derek had dismissed as pathetic and dependent was about to become the star witness in a federal criminal case that would send him to prison for decades. His cruel joke had become her professional resurrection and his own destruction. Maya smiled as she drove toward the airport, anticipating Derek's reaction when federal agents informed him that his loving wife had been the source of the evidence that would destroy his freedom, his career, and his carefully constructed facade of masculine success. Justice was about to be served, and it was going to taste exactly like the revenge Derek had never seen coming. Maya arrived at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport on a Tuesday morning in late March, 3 weeks after she'd been abandoned in Las Vegas, and 16 days after she'd begun the investigation that would reshape the landscape of financial crimes prosecution in the Pacific Northwest. The woman who stepped off the plane bore little resemblance to the diminished wife who'd been left stranded at the Bellagio. Maya moved with purpose and confidence that seemed to emanate from a deeper understanding of her own capabilities and worth. Her phone buzzed with a text from Agent Rodriguez as she waited for her luggage. Warrants issued. Arrests coordinated for Thursday morning. All 3 targets. Your testimony will be crucial for prosecution. Thank you for exceptional investigative work. Maya screenshot the message and filed it in the secure folder that now contained enough evidence to dismantle not just Derek's criminal enterprise, but the broader network of financial professionals who'd been stealing from working families across the region. Maya hadn't returned to the house she'd shared with Derek. Instead, she'd arranged to stay at a corporate apartment downtown while she prepared for the next phase of her professional life. The temporary accommodation felt more like home than the suburban house ever had, decorated with her own preferences and filled with the equipment she needed for complex analytical work. Her first stop was Morrison Investment Group's downtown headquarters, where she'd arranged a meeting with the firm's compliance director through Agent Rodriguez. The FBI had requested that Maya provide a comprehensive briefing about Derek's criminal activities before his arrest, ensuring that Morrison's executives understood the scope of their liability and their obligations to cooperate with federal investigators. The compliance director, Jennifer Walsh, met Maya in a conference room that overlooked Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond. Walsh's expression was grim as she reviewed the preliminary documentation Maya had prepared, a sanitized version of the comprehensive case file that highlighted the most serious violations without revealing investigative techniques that needed to remain confidential. Ms. Chen, this is catastrophic, Walsh said after reviewing the evidence of Derek's unauthorized trading and client account manipulation.
If your analysis is accurate, Derek has exposed Morrison to criminal liability, civil lawsuits, and regulatory sanctions that could end our business permanently. My analysis is accurate, Maya replied, with the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent weeks verifying every detail. Derek has been systematically stealing from client accounts for at least 3 years, possibly longer. The unauthorized trades alone exceed $1.2 million in client funds that were illegally diverted to cover Derek's personal expenses. Walsh pulled up Derek's personnel file on her laptop, scanning through performance reviews and compliance reports that painted Derek as a model employee with exceptional client relationships and impressive revenue generation. His supervisors considered him one of our most successful rainmakers. His client retention rates were exemplary, his revenue numbers were consistently high, and we never received complaints about his investment recommendations. That's because Derek was sophisticated enough to steal from clients in ways that weren't immediately obvious, Maya explained. He'd execute unauthorized trades in small amounts that most clients wouldn't notice in their quarterly statements. He'd move money between accounts temporarily, then replace it before major reporting periods. He'd recommend investment products that generated immediate commissions for him while creating long-term losses that clients wouldn't recognize for months or years. Maya opened her laptop and displayed a presentation she'd prepared for Morrison's executives, showing the correlation between Derek's personal financial needs and the timing of his most aggressive theft from client accounts. When Derek had needed money for the down payment on his luxury car, unauthorized trades had spiked dramatically. When he'd wanted to join the exclusive golf club, client accounts had been systematically raided to fund his membership fees. Derek wasn't stealing randomly, Maya continued. He was treating client accounts like personal ATM machines, timing his theft to coincide with his lifestyle expenses while using sophisticated techniques to avoid detection by your internal auditing systems. Walsh studied the presentation with growing horror, recognizing that Morrison Investment Group had been systematically violated by an employee they'd trusted with their most important client relationships. Ms. Chen, how did you discover this pattern when our internal compliance systems missed it completely? Derek made two critical mistakes. First, he assumed that his wife was too intellectually dependent on him to recognize sophisticated financial crimes. Second, he documented his criminal activities on digital devices that he shared with someone who has extensive experience in forensic accounting and cybersecurity investigation. Maya explained how Derek's dismissive attitude toward her professional capabilities had led him to conduct illegal business activities on devices and networks that she'd had access to throughout their marriage. He'd stored incriminating documents on their shared computer, conducted unauthorized trades using internet connections that logged all activity, and discussed his criminal strategies over phone calls that were automatically backed up to cloud storage accounts Maya could access. Derek's arrogance was his downfall, Maya said. He was so convinced that I was intellectually inferior to him that he never bothered to hide his criminal activities from me. He assumed I was too stupid to understand what I was seeing, even when I was literally watching him steal from client accounts. Walsh closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, processing the implications of Derek's systematic theft and Maya's comprehensive documentation of his crimes. Ms. Chen, how did you discover this pattern when our internal compliance systems missed it completely? Derek made two critical mistakes, Maya replied with confidence. First, he assumed that his wife was too intellectually dependent on him to recognize sophisticated financial crimes. Second, he documented his criminal activities on digital devices that he shared with someone who has extensive experience in forensic accounting and cybersecurity investigation. Maya explained how Derek's dismissive attitude toward her professional capabilities had led him to conduct illegal business activities on devices and networks that she'd had access to throughout their marriage. He'd stored incriminating documents on their shared computer, conducted unauthorized trades using internet connections that logged all activity, and discussed his criminal strategies over phone calls that were automatically backed up to cloud storage accounts Maya could access. Derek's arrogance was his downfall, Maya said. He was so convinced that I was intellectually inferior to him that he never bothered to hide his criminal activities from me. He assumed I was too stupid to understand what I was seeing, even when I was literally watching him steal from client accounts. Walsh closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, processing the implications of Derek's systematic theft and Maya's comprehensive documentation of his crimes. Ms. Chen, what exactly is your professional background? Derek always described you as someone who did basic IT support from home. Maya smiled at the question, remembering the countless times Derek had dismissed her expertise as trivial technical assistance rather than sophisticated analytical work.
I have a PhD in cybersecurity from MIT, certifications in forensic accounting and digital investigations, and 7 years of experience conducting complex financial crimes investigations for federal agencies. Before I scaled back my career to support Derek's advancement, I was considered one of the most effective cybersecurity investigators on the West Coast. The revelation hit Walsh like a physical blow. Morrison Investment Group had unknowingly employed a senior executive whose wife was precisely the kind of expert who could expose sophisticated financial crimes. And Derek had been stupid enough to conduct his criminal activities under her direct observation. Derek told everyone that you were basically a secretary who occasionally helped small investors with basic computer problems. Walsh said, her voice filled with amazement at Derek's complete miscalculation. Derek told everyone what he needed to believe about my capabilities, Maya replied. He couldn't acknowledge that his wife was intellectually superior to him in areas relevant to his criminal activities, so he convinced himself that my expertise had degraded to irrelevance. That delusion allowed him to steal from client accounts while providing comprehensive evidence of his crimes to someone who could document them with federal law enforcement standards. Maya explained how Derek's dismissive attitude toward her professional insights had actually protected his criminal activities for years, because Maya had assumed that Derek's business practices were legitimate and that any irregularities she'd noticed were due to her misunderstanding of industry standards. Derek's condescending explanations had convinced Maya to ignore red flags that she would have immediately recognized as evidence of criminal behavior in any other context. It wasn't until Derek abandoned me in Las Vegas that I realized his dismissive attitude might be motivated by something other than superior knowledge. When I applied my actual analytical capabilities to his business practices, the pattern of systematic theft became immediately obvious. Walsh understood the implications with dawning horror. Morrison Investment Group had been harboring a criminal who'd been stealing from clients for years, and that criminal had been married to an expert who could have exposed his activities at any time if she'd been motivated to look closely at his work. Ms. Chen, what kind of consequences is Morrison facing because of Derek's criminal activities? Maya had prepared for this question, working with Agent Rodriguez to understand the firm's potential liability and their options for minimizing damage through comprehensive cooperation with federal investigators. Morrison's liability depends largely on how you respond to the discovery of Derek's crimes. If you cooperate fully with federal investigators and take immediate steps to protect clients from further theft, the government will likely treat Morrison as a victim of Derek's deception rather than a co-conspirator in his criminal activities. What does full cooperation look like? Complete access to Derek's client files, transaction records, and communication history. Immediate notification of all affected clients about potential unauthorized trading in their accounts. Cooperation with forensic accountants who will calculate the total amount Derek stole and identify which clients were harmed. Support for federal prosecutors who will seek criminal charges against Derek for theft, fraud, and securities violations. Maya outlined the comprehensive remediation plan that Agent Rodriguez had developed, designed to protect Morrison's remaining clients while ensuring that Derek's victims received appropriate compensation for their losses. The plan would be expensive and time-consuming, but it offered Morrison's best chance of surviving Derek's criminal legacy. There's one additional element, Maya said. Morrison needs to implement new compliance systems that would prevent future employees from engaging in Derek's type of systematic theft. The FBI wants to use Morrison as a case study for how investment firms can protect themselves from sophisticated internal fraud. Walsh nodded grimly, recognizing that Morrison's survival depended on their willingness to acknowledge Derek's crimes publicly and implement reforms that would prevent similar theft in the future. Ms. Chen, would you be willing to consult with Morrison on developing those compliance systems? Your expertise in detecting financial crimes could be invaluable for protecting our clients going forward.
Maya had anticipated this offer, recognizing that her investigation of Derek had demonstrated capabilities that would be extremely valuable to financial firms seeking to prevent internal fraud. I'd be interested in discussing a consulting arrangement after Derek's criminal case is resolved. Right now, my priority is ensuring that federal prosecutors have everything they need to seek appropriate criminal penalties for Derek's theft from working families. The meeting concluded with Walsh's commitment to provide complete cooperation with federal investigators and immediate implementation of protective measures for Morrison's remaining clients. Maya left Morrison's headquarters knowing that Derek's criminal enterprise was being systematically dismantled by people who understood the scope of his theft and the sophistication of his deception. Maya's next stop was the downtown office of Patricia Morrison, senior partner at Morrison & Associates, the law firm that would represent her in divorce proceedings against Derek. Patricia had reviewed Maya's preliminary documentation of Derek's financial crimes and was preparing a divorce strategy that would maximize Maya's leverage while minimizing Derek's ability to hide marital assets through his criminal activities. Maya, this is the most comprehensive documentation of spousal financial misconduct I've seen in 25 years of family law practice, Patricia said, reviewing the evidence Maya had gathered about Derek's systematic theft and deception. Derek's criminal activities have created multiple grounds for divorce that will allow you to claim the majority of marital assets while seeking additional damages for his deliberate emotional abuse. Patricia explained how Derek's criminal behavior had legally voided many of the financial agreements he'd convinced Maya to sign during their marriage. Documents that had been presented as necessary for tax optimization were actually designed to hide Derek's illegal income and limit Maya's access to marital property. Maya's signature on those agreements had been obtained through fraud, making them unenforceable in divorce proceedings. More importantly, Patricia continued, Derek's systematic emotional abuse and his planned abandonment constitute marital misconduct that will affect property division significantly. Washington state courts take a very dim view of spouses who engage in deliberate cruelty designed to psychologically damage their partners. Maya reviewed the divorce strategy Patricia had developed, which sought not only an equitable division of legitimate marital assets, but also compensation for the years of emotional abuse Derek had inflicted while planning her eventual abandonment. The strategy was designed to ensure that Maya received appropriate financial security while Derek faced the full consequences of his criminal and personal misconduct. Patricia, what happens to Derek's stolen money during divorce proceedings? That's where it gets interesting, Patricia replied, with the satisfaction of someone who specialized in complex financial litigation. Derek's criminal activities created income that wasn't legitimately his, but he used that stolen money to purchase marital assets like your house, his car, and various luxury items. Those assets are subject to division in divorce proceedings, but Derek will also face criminal restitution orders that require him to repay his theft victims. Patricia explained how Derek's financial situation would become increasingly complicated as criminal prosecutors and divorce attorneys simultaneously pursued claims against his assets. Derek would face criminal restitution orders requiring him to repay the clients he'd stolen from, civil lawsuits from Morrison Investment Group seeking damages for his misconduct, and divorce proceedings that would claim the majority of his remaining legitimate assets. The mathematics are quite simple, Patricia said. Derek's legitimate assets are insufficient to cover his criminal restitution, his civil liability, and his divorce obligations. He's going to emerge from this situation financially destroyed, while you'll receive appropriate compensation for years of abuse and deception. Maya felt deep satisfaction at the comprehensive nature of Derek's impending financial ruin. He'd spent years building a lifestyle funded by stolen money while systematically undermining her confidence and independence. The legal system would ensure that Derek faced appropriate consequences for both his criminal activities and his personal cruelty. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that Seattle experienced only during perfect spring weather. Maya was in her temporary apartment, reviewing final preparations for Derek's arrest and coordinating with Agent Rodriguez about her role in the federal investigation, when her phone buzzed with a call from Sandra in Las Vegas. Maya, it's happening, Sandra said without preamble. Agent Rodriguez just called me. Federal agents are executing arrest warrants for Derek and his brothers simultaneously in 3 different cities. Derek's being arrested at the St. Regis Aspen, where he's apparently still celebrating his brilliant abandonment strategy. Maya felt a mixture of anticipation and closure as she imagined Derek's shock when federal agents informed him that his loving wife had been the source of the evidence that would send him to prison. What about Jake and Connor? Jake's being arrested at his bank in Denver, where he was apparently conducting business as usual despite being under federal investigation for loan fraud. Connor's being taken into custody at his law office in Boulder, where he was meeting with clients whose real estate transactions he'd been manipulating for personal gain. Sandra described the coordinated arrests with obvious satisfaction, explaining how federal agents had timed the operation to maximize psychological impact while preventing the brothers from coordinating their legal defense or destroying additional evidence.
Agent Rodriguez wanted me to tell you that Derek's arrest was particularly memorable. When agents informed him that he was being arrested for securities fraud and theft from client accounts, Derek immediately claimed that his wife could verify his innocence because she'd been monitoring his business practices for years. Maya laughed at Derek's final miscalculation, his assumption that she would provide alibi testimony rather than prosecution evidence. What did they tell him? Agent Rodriguez personally informed Derek that his wife had been the primary source of evidence for the federal investigation, and that her testimony would be crucial for his prosecution. Apparently, Derek's reaction was worth documenting for law enforcement training purposes. Maya could imagine Derek's shock and disbelief when he realized that the woman he'd dismissed as intellectually dependent had systematically gathered evidence of his criminal activities for federal prosecutors. His abandonment strategy had been designed to demonstrate Maya's helplessness and dependence, but instead, it had motivated the investigation that would destroy his freedom and his carefully constructed facade of success. Sandra, how long before Derek and his brothers are formally charged? Initial appearances are scheduled for Monday morning in federal court. Derek's being transported back to Seattle for prosecution in the Western District of Washington, since most of his victims were Washington state residents. Jake and Connor will face charges in Colorado for their banking and real estate fraud, but they'll also be charged federally for their role in the conspiracy. Maya realized that Derek's criminal troubles were just beginning. Federal prosecutors would seek criminal penalties that could result in decades of prison time, while civil attorneys would pursue financial damages that would bankrupt Derek completely. His professional reputation would be destroyed permanently, making future employment in any financial services role impossible. Maya, there's one more thing, Sandra said. Agent Rodriguez wants to know if you'd be willing to consider consulting with the FBI on similar cases. Your investigative work on Derek's crimes was so comprehensive that federal prosecutors want to use your techniques as a training model for other financial crimes investigations. Maya had been expecting this opportunity, recognizing that her investigation had demonstrated capabilities that would be valuable for law enforcement agencies dealing with sophisticated financial criminals. Tell Agent Rodriguez I'm definitely interested in consulting work, but I want to focus on Derek's prosecution first. Maya spent the weekend preparing for Derek's initial court appearance, reviewing her testimony with federal prosecutors, and ensuring that her evidence would be presented in the most effective way possible. She also used the time to finalize her living arrangements and begin planning her return to professional consulting work. The corporate apartment had served its purpose as temporary accommodation, but Maya wanted a permanent home that reflected her renewed confidence and independence. She'd found a modern condominium in Belltown with views of Elliott Bay and space for the sophisticated computer equipment she'd need for advanced cybersecurity consulting. More importantly, she'd begun conversations with 3 different consulting firms that specialized in financial crimes investigation and digital forensics. Her work on Derek's case had demonstrated capabilities that were in high demand among law firms, government agencies, and corporations seeking to protect themselves from internal fraud.
Monday morning's court hearing was held in the federal courthouse in downtown Seattle, where Derek would make his initial appearance before a magistrate judge who would set bail conditions and schedule future proceedings. Maya arrived early and met with Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Chen, the federal prosecutor who would be handling Derek's case. Ms. Chen, your investigative work has provided us with the strongest financial crimes case I've prosecuted in 15 years, Attorney Chen said as they reviewed Maya's evidence in a conference room adjacent to the courtroom. Derek's systematic theft is documented so comprehensively that defense attorneys will have very limited options for challenging the charges. Attorney Chen explained how Maya's evidence would be used to support multiple federal charges against Derek, including securities fraud, theft from employee benefit plans, wire fraud, and money laundering. Each charge carried potential prison sentences that could result in Derek spending decades in federal custody. The unauthorized trading alone supports wire fraud charges with 20-year maximum sentences, Attorney Chen continued. The theft from pension funds constitutes violations of ERISA that carry additional penalties. The money laundering charges relate to Derek's use of stolen funds to purchase personal assets while concealing the illegal source of his income. Maya reviewed the comprehensive indictment that federal prosecutors had prepared based on her investigation, recognizing that Derek's criminal activities were even more extensive than she'd initially realized. Federal investigators had discovered additional evidence of theft and fraud that extended Derek's criminal behavior back more than 5 years.
Attorney Chen, what kind of sentence is Derek likely to face if he's convicted on all charges? Federal sentencing guidelines suggest Derek could receive between 15 and 25 years in federal prison, depending on his criminal history and his willingness to cooperate with prosecutors. However, Derek's systematic theft from pension funds and his sophisticated efforts to conceal his crimes will likely result in sentences at the higher end of that range. Maya felt satisfaction at the prospect of Derek spending decades in federal prison, recognizing that his criminal activities had harmed hundreds of working families who'd trusted him with their retirement security. Derek's punishment would be proportional to the scope of his theft and the damage he'd inflicted on innocent victims. The courtroom was packed with media representatives, Morrison Investment Group executives, and family members of Derek's victims when proceedings began at 9 o'clock sharp. Maya sat in the front row behind the prosecution table, where Derek would be able to see her when he was brought in for his initial appearance. Derek entered the courtroom wearing an orange jumpsuit and restraints, his usual confidence replaced by obvious shock and disbelief. His eyes immediately found Maya and the audience, and she watched his expression change from confusion to recognition to something approaching panic as he realized that his wife was sitting with federal prosecutors rather than providing support for his defense. The magistrate judge read the charges against Derek in a voice that carried clearly throughout the packed courtroom. Conspiracy to commit securities fraud, theft from employee benefit plans, wire fraud, money laundering, and criminal forfeiture of assets obtained through illegal activities. Each charge was accompanied by maximum penalty information that added up to potential life imprisonment. Derek's court-appointed attorney requested reasonable bail, arguing that Derek had strong community ties and was unlikely to flee prosecution. Federal prosecutors opposed bail, citing the severity of the charges, the extent of Derek's theft, and the risk that Derek might attempt to flee rather than face decades in federal prison. Attorney Chen addressed the court with the kind of comprehensive presentation that demonstrated why federal prosecutors had such high conviction rates in financial crimes cases. Your Honor, the defendant systematically stole more than $1.2 million from client accounts over a period of several years, using sophisticated techniques to avoid detection while building a lifestyle funded entirely by theft from working families' retirement accounts. Attorney Chen described Derek's criminal activities in detail that made clear the scope of his theft and the harm he'd inflicted on innocent victims. Teachers whose pension funds had been depleted, firefighters whose retirement accounts had been raided, municipal employees whose financial security had been compromised by Derek's greed and criminal behavior. Most significantly, Your Honor, the defendant planned and executed the abandonment of his wife in Las Vegas as part of a broader strategy of emotional abuse designed to prevent her from discovering his criminal activities. The defendant's personal cruelty was directly connected to his professional misconduct. Maya listened to Attorney Chen's presentation with growing satisfaction, recognizing that Derek's abandonment strategy was being used against him as evidence of consciousness of guilt and sophisticated planning to avoid detection of his crimes. The magistrate judge denied bail, citing the severity of the charges and the substantial evidence of Derek's flight risk. Derek would remain in federal custody pending trial, which was scheduled to begin in 6 months. His shocked expression when he was led away in restraints suggested that he was finally beginning to understand the scope of his legal troubles. Maya left the courthouse feeling that justice was finally being served, but she also recognized that Derek's prosecution was just the beginning of her own professional resurrection. Her investigation had demonstrated capabilities that were in high demand among organizations seeking to protect themselves from sophisticated financial crimes. That afternoon, Maya met with Dr. Elizabeth Warren, senior partner at North Point Security Consulting, the cybersecurity firm that Maya had worked at before scaling back her career to support Derek's advancement. Dr. Warren had followed Maya's work on Derek's case through her contacts in federal law enforcement and was interested in offering Maya a senior consulting position that would utilize her demonstrated expertise in financial crimes investigation. Maya, your work on the Derek Chen case has impressed everyone in our industry. Federal prosecutors are calling it the most comprehensive financial crimes investigation they've seen from a single analyst. Law enforcement agencies across the country want to learn your techniques. Dr. Warren offered Maya a position as Director of Financial Crimes Investigation,
with responsibility for building North Point's capability to assist corporations, law firms, and government agencies with complex fraud detection and prevention. The position would allow Maya to apply her analytical skills to the most challenging cases while building a team of specialists who could replicate her investigative methods. The compensation package starts at $180,000 annually, plus performance bonuses tied to successful case outcomes. You'd also have equity participation in North Point's growth, since your expertise would be central to expanding our financial crimes practice. Maya felt deep satisfaction at the recognition of her professional capabilities and the opportunity to build something meaningful from Derek's attempted destruction of her confidence. Dr. Warren, I'm definitely interested, but I want to complete Derek's prosecution first. His trial will require significant testimony preparation and court appearances. That's exactly what we'd expect from someone with your integrity. Derek's prosecution will actually enhance your credibility with potential clients who want to hire the investigator who brought down such a sophisticated criminal operation. Maya left North Point's offices feeling that her professional future was secure and that her capabilities would be valued rather than dismissed. Derek's abandonment had been intended to demonstrate her dependence and helplessness, but instead it had led to opportunities that exceeded anything she'd achieved before their marriage. Over the following months, Maya testified before federal grand juries, provided expert witness testimony for congressional hearings on financial crimes prevention, and consulted with law enforcement agencies across the country that wanted to understand her investigative techniques. Her work on Derek's case had established her as one of the nation's leading experts in detecting sophisticated financial fraud. Derek's trial began in September, 6 months after his arrest in Aspen.
The proceedings attracted national media attention due to the scope of Derek's theft and the unusual circumstances of his discovery by his abandoned wife. Maya's testimony was the centerpiece of the prosecution's case, demonstrating not only Derek's criminal activities, but also the systematic emotional abuse he'd used to prevent detection of his crimes. Mrs. Chen, Attorney Chen asked during Maya's testimony, "Can you explain to the jury how the defendant's treatment of you was connected to his criminal activities?" Maya had prepared for this question, recognizing that Derek's personal cruelty was crucial evidence of his consciousness of guilt and his efforts to avoid detection. Derek systematically undermined my professional confidence and dismissed my analytical capabilities because he knew that I had the expertise to detect his criminal activities if I ever applied those skills to his business practices. Maya explained how Derek's condescending attitude toward her work had been a deliberate strategy to prevent her from examining his business activities too closely. His dismissal of her professional insights had convinced Maya to ignore red flags that she would have immediately recognized as evidence of criminal behavior in any other context. Derek's abandonment of me in Las Vegas was the culmination of years of psychological manipulation designed to make me feel intellectually dependent on him, Maya continued. He wanted me to believe that I was incapable of surviving without his guidance and support, which would prevent me from questioning his business practices or seeking independent analysis of our financial situation. The jury listened with obvious attention as Maya described Derek's systematic emotional abuse and his calculated plan to abandon her as part of a broader strategy to avoid accountability for his criminal activities. Derek's own social media posts were used as evidence, showing his celebration of her abandonment and his belief that treating his wife with contempt was admirable masculine behavior. Defense attorneys attempted to portray Derek's crimes as isolated lapses in judgment rather than systematic theft, but Maya's comprehensive documentation made clear that Derek's criminal activities had been planned and executed with sophisticated understanding of financial regulations and auditing procedures. Mrs. Chen, Attorney Chen asked during Maya's testimony, "Can you explain to the jury how the defendant's treatment of you was connected to his criminal activities?" Maya had prepared for this question, recognizing that Derek's personal cruelty was crucial evidence of his consciousness of guilt and his efforts to avoid detection. Derek systematically undermined my professional confidence and dismissed my analytical capabilities because he knew that I had the expertise to detect his criminal activities if I ever applied those skills to his business practices. Maya explained how Derek's condescending attitude toward her work had been a deliberate strategy to prevent her from examining his business activities too closely. His dismissal of her professional insights had convinced Maya to ignore red flags that she would have immediately recognized as evidence of criminal behavior in any other context. Derek's abandonment of me in Las Vegas was the culmination of years of psychological manipulation designed to make me feel intellectually dependent on him, Maya continued. He wanted me to believe that I was incapable of surviving without his guidance and support, which would prevent me from questioning his business practices or seeking independent analysis of our financial situation. The jury listened with obvious attention as Maya described Derek's systematic emotional abuse and his calculated plan to abandon her as part of a broader strategy to avoid accountability for his criminal activities. Derek's own social media posts were used as evidence showing his celebration of her abandonment and his belief that treating his wife with contempt was admirable masculine behavior. Defense attorneys attempted to portray Derek's crimes as isolated lapses in judgment rather than systematic theft, but Maya's comprehensive documentation made clear that Derek's criminal activities had been planned and executed with sophisticated understanding of financial regulations and auditing procedures. Mrs. Chen, the defense attorney asked during cross-examination, "Isn't it true that you had access to the defendant's business files throughout your marriage and never reported any concerns to authorities?" Maya had anticipated this line of attack, recognizing that defense attorneys would try to suggest that her silence about Derek's crimes made her complicit in his activities. Derek spent years convincing me that my analytical capabilities had degraded and that I was too intellectually limited to understand sophisticated business practices. His systematic psychological manipulation was designed specifically to prevent me from applying my actual expertise to his criminal activities. Maya explained how Derek's condescending attitude toward her work had been so comprehensive and consistent that she'd begun to doubt her own professional judgment, assuming that any irregularities she noticed were due to her misunderstanding rather than Derek's criminal behavior. It wasn't until Derek abandoned me in Las Vegas that I realized his condescending explanations might be motivated by something other than superior knowledge, Maya testified. When I finally applied my actual analytical capabilities to his business practices, the pattern of systematic theft became immediately obvious. The trial lasted 3 weeks, with Maya's testimony spanning 4 days of direct examination and cross-examination. Federal prosecutors used her evidence to demonstrate not only Derek's criminal activities, but also the sophisticated planning and psychological manipulation he'd used to avoid detection. Derek's conviction on all charges was announced on a Friday afternoon in October, exactly 7 months after he'd abandoned Maya in Las Vegas. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before finding Derek guilty of securities fraud, theft from employee benefit plans, wire fraud, money laundering, and criminal forfeiture of assets. Maya was present in the courtroom when the verdicts were read, watching Derek's final realization that his criminal activities had been comprehensively documented by the wife he'd dismissed as intellectually inferior. His sentencing was scheduled for January, where he would likely receive a prison term of 20 to 25 years. Jake and Connor had pleaded guilty to their own charges in Colorado, receiving sentences of 8 and 12 years, respectively, for their roles in banking fraud and real estate manipulation. Their professional licenses had been permanently revoked, and their participation in Maya's abandonment had been used as evidence of character flaws that supported enhanced sentences. Maya left Derek's trial knowing that justice had been comprehensively served and that Derek's victims would receive appropriate restitution from the forfeiture of his criminal assets. More importantly, she knew that her professional capabilities had been validated in the most dramatic way possible, establishing her as a leading expert in financial crimes investigation. 6 months later, Maya stood in her new office at North Point Security Consulting, reviewing case files for 3 different federal investigations where her expertise was being used to detect sophisticated financial fraud. The office overlooked Elliott Bay and the Olympic Mountains beyond, providing daily reminders of how far she'd traveled from the diminished woman Derek had abandoned in Las Vegas. Her team of financial crimes investigators had grown to 12 specialists who applied Maya's analytical techniques to cases involving corporate fraud, money laundering, and securities violations. Their success rate was unprecedented, with federal prosecutors achieving convictions in over 90% of cases where North Point provided investigative support.
Maya's personal life had also been transformed completely. Her divorce from Derek had been finalized 6 months after his conviction, with Maya receiving the majority of legitimate marital assets, while Derek faced comprehensive restitution orders that would ensure his financial ruin for decades. More importantly, Maya had begun dating Dr. Michael Rodriguez, a forensic accountant who worked with federal agencies on complex white-collar crimes. Michael valued Maya's analytical capabilities and treated her as an intellectual equal, providing the kind of partnership that Maya had once believed she'd had with Derek. Maya, we've got another case that requires your specific expertise. The SEC wants us to investigate a tech startup whose financial statements don't match their claimed revenue streams. It looks like systematic investor fraud designed to inflate company valuations. Maya reviewed the preliminary documentation with the kind of analytical excitement that had characterized her best work throughout her career. This reminds me of the cryptocurrency fraud case we solved last month. Similar patterns of manipulated transaction data and falsified revenue reports. Maya's professional reputation had become so strong that law enforcement agencies specifically requested her involvement in their most complex financial crimes investigations. Her techniques for detecting sophisticated fraud had been adopted by FBI training programs and were being taught to federal agents across the country. The woman Derek dismissed as an expensive secretary, whose skills had degraded to uselessness, was now considered one of the nation's leading experts in financial crimes investigation. Her annual income exceeded Derek's legitimate earnings by more than 400%, and her professional recognition included speaking engagements at international conferences and advisory positions with federal regulatory agencies. Maya often thought about Derek during her most successful professional moments, imagining his reaction if he could see her current achievements and recognition. He was serving his 23-year federal sentence at a minimum security prison in Oregon, working in the institution's library for 30 cents per hour, while Maya built a consulting practice that generated 7-figure annual revenues. Derek's letters from prison were forwarded to Maya's attorney, where they were filed without being read. Maya had no interest in Derek's attempts at reconciliation or his belated recognition of her capabilities. His abandonment had been intended to break her spirit, but instead, it had freed her to achieve professional success that exceeded anything she'd accomplished during their marriage. The irony was perfect and complete. Derek had tried to abandon dead weight and had actually discarded the one person who could have protected him from the consequences of his own criminal stupidity. His belief in his intellectual superiority.
You were a hero to everyone whose lives were damaged by Derek's greed. Maya kept the letter in her desk drawer, reading it whenever she needed reminding that her investigation had been about more than personal justice. Derek's crimes had harmed innocent people whose only mistake was trusting a financial advisor who prioritized his own greed over their retirement security. The broader impact of Maya's investigation extended far beyond Derek's individual case. Her techniques for detecting financial fraud had been incorporated into regulatory oversight programs that protected millions of investors from similar crimes. Morrison Investment Group had implemented compliance systems based on Maya's recommendations, preventing future employees from engaging in Derek's type of systematic theft. Maya had also become a sought-after expert witness in civil litigation involving financial fraud, helping victims recover damages from sophisticated criminals who thought they were too clever to be caught. Her testimony had resulted in hundreds of millions of dollars in recoveries for fraud victims across the country. 2 years after Derek's conviction, Maya was invited to testify before a Senate committee investigating financial crimes prevention. Her recommendations for strengthening regulatory oversight and improving detection capabilities were incorporated into federal legislation that enhanced penalties for investment fraud and expanded resources for financial crimes investigation. Senator Williams, Maya testified during the hearing, sophisticated financial criminals like Derek Chen succeed because they understand that their victims often lack the technical expertise to detect complex fraud schemes. We need regulatory systems that can identify suspicious patterns before criminals steal millions of dollars from working families. Maya's congressional testimony was broadcast live and later cited in academic research about financial crimes prevention.
Her transformation from abandoned wife to leading expert had become a symbol of how underestimated capabilities could be awakened by crisis and applied to achieve justice for innocent victims. The Chen case had also inspired Maya to establish a foundation that provided pro bono financial crimes investigation services to victims who couldn't afford comprehensive legal representation. The foundation's work had helped expose dozens of smaller-scale frauds and recovered millions of dollars for victims of investment scams and professional misconduct. Maya's personal life had continued to flourish alongside her professional success. Her relationship with Michael Rodriguez had developed into a true partnership based on mutual respect and shared intellectual interests. They'd purchased a house together in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, where Maya maintained a home office for consulting work that required maximum security and confidentiality. Michael understood Maya's work in ways that Derek never had, often providing insights that enhanced her investigations and celebrating her successes without feeling threatened by her expertise. The relationship was everything Maya had once hoped to have with Derek: partnership, respect, intellectual compatibility, and genuine appreciation for each other's capabilities. On quiet evenings, Maya would sometimes reflect on the woman she'd been during her marriage to Derek, diminished and dismissed despite possessing capabilities that could have flourished if they'd been valued rather than systematically undermined. Derek's abandonment had been intended as the ultimate humiliation, but it had actually been her liberation from a relationship that was slowly destroying her professional confidence and personal worth. Maya's calendar was now filled with speaking engagements, consulting projects, and federal investigations that utilized her expertise in financial crimes detection. She'd been appointed to advisory committees for the SEC and the FBI, providing guidance on emerging fraud schemes and technological tools for detecting sophisticated criminal activities. The woman Derek had called pathetic and nobody was now recognized as one of the nation's leading experts in her field, with professional achievements that exceeded anything Derek had accomplished through legitimate means. Her annual income was more than triple Derek's highest earnings, and her professional reputation was built on integrity and analytical excellence, rather than theft and deception. Derek would be eligible for parole in 2045. When he would be 68 years old and permanently barred from any work in financial services. Maya would be 52, at the peak of her professional influence and recognition. By the time Derek was released from prison, Maya would likely be directing national policy on financial crimes prevention, while Derek struggled to find employment that didn't require background checks or professional references. Maya's story had become a powerful reminder that underestimating people carries consequences that extend far beyond immediate relationships. Derek's dismissal of his wife's capabilities had cost him his freedom, his career, his reputation, and his financial security. His cruel joke had become his own destruction, administered by the woman he'd never bothered to understand or respect. The transformation was complete and irreversible. Maya Chen had evolved from dismissed wife to leading expert, from abandoned victim to powerful advocate for justice. Derek's attempt to demonstrate her weakness had instead revealed her strength, and his effort to prove her dependence had established her independence permanently. Justice had been served comprehensively, not through revenge or retaliation, but through the application of expertise that Derek had been too arrogant to recognize and too stupid to respect. The woman he'd left in Las Vegas had been a weapon he never learned to identify, and his abandonment had simply provided her with the motivation to use her capabilities against him. Maya smiled as she reviewed her calendar for the coming week, which included congressional testimony, federal case consultations, and media interviews about financial crimes prevention. Derek's Vegas prank lasted one night. Maya's professional success would last the rest of her life. The phone call from Agent Rodriguez arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in late spring, exactly 3 years after Derek's arrest in Aspen. Maya was in her office at North Point reviewing case files for a massive cryptocurrency fraud investigation when her secure line rang with news that would provide the final chapter in Derek's downfall. Maya, I wanted you to hear this directly from me, Agent Rodriguez said. Derek Chen died in federal prison yesterday evening. Apparent heart attack, likely brought on by the stress of his upcoming parole hearing and his realization that he'd never be able to rebuild his life outside prison. Maya felt a complex mixture of emotions at the news of Derek's death. Relief that his victims would never have to worry about him resuming his criminal activities, sadness for the waste of potential that Derek's life had represented, and a strange sense of closure that the man who'd tried to destroy her had ultimately destroyed only himself. Agent Rodriguez, what happens to Derek's remaining restitution obligations? His estate will continue to pay restitution to his victims until all debts are satisfied. Derek's death doesn't eliminate his financial obligations to the people he harmed. In fact, his life insurance policy will accelerate some restitution payments. Maya realized that Derek's death meant that his victims would receive full compensation sooner than expected, while Derek himself had died in federal prison without ever experiencing freedom again. His criminal activities had cost him everything: his marriage, his career, his reputation, his freedom, and his life. The news of Derek's death was reported in financial industry publications as a cautionary tale about the consequences of sophisticated white-collar crime. Maya was quoted in several articles about Derek's case, emphasizing that financial crimes harm real people and that justice requires comprehensive accountability for professional misconduct. Derek Chen's death in federal prison serves as a reminder that financial crimes have serious consequences. His theft from working families' retirement accounts wasn't a victimless crime, and his punishment reflected the real harm he caused to innocent people who trusted him with their financial security. Maya attended Derek's funeral not out of lingering affection, but out of respect for the closure it provided to his victims and to the community he'd harmed. The service was sparsely attended, with only Derek's elderly parents and a few former colleagues who remembered him before his criminal activities were exposed. Maya sat in the back of the chapel, observing the end of a life that had been characterized by systematic deception and cruelty disguised as success and charm. Derek's eulogy focused on his early potential and his family's grief, carefully avoiding mention of the crimes that had defined his final years and the victims who'd suffered because of his greed. After the service, Maya was approached by Derek's mother, an elderly woman whose grief was complicated by his son's criminal legacy and the knowledge that his victims had suffered because of choices he'd made as an adult.
Chen, Derek's mother said quietly, I know my son caused you great pain, and I know he harmed many innocent people through his criminal activities. I want you to know that the man who committed those crimes wasn't the son I raised, and I'm grateful that you had the courage to seek justice for his victims. Maya felt unexpected compassion for Derek's mother, recognizing that parents often suffer when their children's criminal activities are exposed and punished. Mrs. Patterson, Derek made his own choices as an adult. His crimes weren't a reflection of your parenting or your values. Derek's mother nodded gratefully, understanding that Maya's investigation had been motivated by justice rather than personal revenge. I hope you found happiness and success in your life after Derek. You deserved so much better than the way he treated you. Maya left Derek's funeral with a sense of complete closure, knowing that the chapter of her life defined by their marriage was permanently finished. Derek's death had provided final confirmation that his criminal activities carried consequences that extended beyond legal punishment to ultimate personal destruction. The years following Derek's death brought continued professional success and personal fulfillment for Maya. Her consulting practice expanded internationally, with governments and corporations seeking her expertise in detecting and preventing sophisticated financial crimes. Her techniques were taught in law enforcement academies around the world, and her influence on financial crimes prevention policy extended across multiple countries. Maya's relationship with Michael Rodriguez had developed into marriage, a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine appreciation for each other's intellectual capabilities. Their wedding was attended by colleagues from law enforcement, academia, and the financial services industry who recognized Maya's transformation from Derek's victim to leading expert in her field.
The foundation Maya had established to help fraud victims grew into a major nonprofit organization that provided investigative services, legal support, and financial recovery assistance to people harmed by professional misconduct. The foundation's work had exposed hundreds of smaller-scale frauds and recovered tens of millions of dollars for victims who couldn't afford comprehensive legal representation. Maya's congressional testimony had led to federal legislation that strengthened penalties for financial crimes and expanded resources for victim support. The Chen Act, as it became known, established enhanced restitution requirements for white-collar criminals and created federal programs to help fraud victims rebuild their financial security. 5 years after Derek's death, Maya was appointed as the first director of financial crimes prevention for the Securities and Exchange Commission, a position created specifically to utilize her expertise in developing regulatory systems that could detect sophisticated fraud before it harmed innocent investors. Maya's acceptance speech for the position was delivered to an audience that included federal officials, industry leaders, and representatives of investor advocacy organizations. Her remarks focused on the responsibility that financial professionals had to protect their clients' interests and the consequences that awaited those who prioritized personal gain over fiduciary duty. Financial criminals like Chen succeed because they exploit the trust that working families place in professional advisors, Maya said during her speech. Our regulatory systems must be sophisticated enough to detect complex fraud schemes and strong enough to ensure that white-collar criminals face consequences proportional to the harm they cause. Maya's appointment represented the ultimate vindication of her capabilities and the complete reversal of Derek's attempt to diminish her professional worth. The woman he'd dismissed as intellectually inferior was now directing national policy on financial crimes prevention, while Derek's legacy was reduced to a cautionary tale about the consequences of professional misconduct and personal cruelty. The transformation was so complete that Maya sometimes found it difficult to remember the diminished woman she'd been during her marriage to Derek. Her current life was characterized by professional recognition, personal fulfillment, and meaningful work that protected innocent people from sophisticated criminals. Maya's office at the SEC overlooked the National Mall, providing daily reminders of the public service mission that had grown out of her personal experience with financial crime and emotional abuse. Her wall displayed awards from law enforcement agencies, photographs with congressional leaders, and letters from fraud victims whose lives had been improved by her investigative work. The Chen case had become a landmark in financial crimes prosecution, cited in law school textbooks and used as a training example for federal agents. Maya's investigative techniques were considered standard practice for complex fraud cases, and her expertise was sought by prosecutors and regulators dealing with the most sophisticated white-collar criminals. Maya often received speaking invitations from organizations seeking to understand how victims of financial crime could seek justice and rebuild their lives. Her presentations combined technical expertise in fraud detection with personal insights about recovering from systematic emotional abuse and professional dismissal. The key insight from my experience, Maya would tell audiences, is that sophisticated criminals often succeed by convincing their victims that they're too intellectually limited to understand complex schemes. Chen spent years telling me that my analytical capabilities had degraded, when in reality he was afraid that I might apply those capabilities to his criminal activities. Maya's story had inspired academic research about the intersection of domestic abuse and white-collar crime, with scholars recognizing that financial criminals often used psychological manipulation to prevent detection of their illegal activities. Her case had become a model for understanding how personal cruelty and professional misconduct were often connected. 10 years after her abandonment in Las Vegas, Maya was recognized by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in financial services, an honor that acknowledged her impact on regulatory policy and fraud prevention. The profile article described her transformation from abandoned wife to leading expert as a masterclass in how underestimated capabilities can be awakened by crisis and applied to achieve comprehensive justice. Maya's influence extended beyond individual cases to systemic reforms that protected millions of investors from sophisticated fraud schemes. Her regulatory initiatives had prevented billions of dollars in potential losses and established legal frameworks that made it more difficult for financial professionals to engage in the type of systematic theft that Derek had practiced. The woman Derek had called pathetic and nobody had become one of the most influential figures in her industry, with professional achievements that would outlast any memory of the man who'd tried to destroy her confidence and independence. His abandonment had been intended as ultimate humiliation, but it had become her liberation and his destruction. Maya's calendar remained filled with congressional testimony, international conferences, and regulatory initiatives that utilized her expertise in protecting working families from financial predators. Her work had become her legacy, ensuring that Derek's type of sophisticated theft would be more difficult to execute and easier to detect in the future. The final irony was perfect. Derek's attempt to prove Maya's weakness had established her strength permanently, while his effort to demonstrate his superiority had revealed his criminal stupidity. The Vegas prank that was supposed to last one night had consequences that would protect innocent people for generations. Maya smiled as she prepared for another day of meaningful work that honored Derek's victims while preventing future crimes against working families. Derek's cruel joke had become his own destruction and her professional resurrection. Justice had been served comprehensively, and its effects would last forever.